Royal Guard fires amid chaos. Prince George shattered by Camilla's daughter's actions, face ground broken. Birds chirped softly in the trees, almost as if nothing unusual could disturb the calm. Prince George, the young heir to a proud lineage, stood quietly beside his parents, taking in the scene before him. For someone who spent much of his life under public scrutiny, moments like this were rare treasures. Today, he had the chance to walk among the crowd, wave to people, and enjoy a simple glimpse of normal life. Yet despite the sunshine and cheerful chatter, a subtle tension lingered in the air. The palace grounds were alive with anticipation. Royal guards, dressed immaculately in their ceremonial uniforms, stood at attention at every corner, eyes scanning the crowd with practiced vigilance. Photographers adjusted their lenses, capturing snapshots of an event that promised to be both grand and historic. Tourists and locals alike had gathered along the Golden Gates, their faces pressed close to capture a fleeting glimpse of the royal family. Excitement buzzed through the air like electricity, blending with whispers of admiration, curiosity, and speculation. Everyone wanted to be part of this moment, even for just a second. Prince George, though only a young man, carried himself with a calm dignity that had been instilled in him since childhood. His posture was straight, his gaze attentive, yet there was a softness in his expression that made him approachable, even amidst the grandeur of royalty. Today, he wore a simple outfit, carefully chosen to appear approachable yet regal. His mother had insisted on it, reminding him gently that he represented not only himself, but the legacy of generations before him. George had nodded silently, feeling the weight of expectation but also a quiet pride. He had always understood, in his own way, the responsibility that came with his position. As he walked along the garden paths with his parents, George noticed the intricate details of the palace grounds, the meticulously trimmed hedges, the fountains that sparkled under the morning sun, and the flowers that seemed to bloom with more vibrancy than anywhere else. It was a place of history, a place where kings and queens had walked, decisions had been made, and stories had unfolded. Yet amid this grandeur, George felt a strange sense of detachment. He loved his family and his heritage, but there was always a part of him that longed for ordinary experiences, walking through the streets without an audience, laughing freely with friends, or simply sitting in a cafe without the gaze of cameras following him. The crowd seemed friendly enough, their excitement genuine, yet George could sense subtle undercurrents of energy that did not belong entirely to admiration. Among the smiles and waves, there were whispers, quick glances, and movements that hinted at something less predictable. He tried not to dwell on it, reminding himself that these events were always filled with anticipation and nerves. Still, a small knot of unease formed in his stomach, a feeling he could not quite shake. Sometimes, even in the most controlled environments, surprises found their way in, and he had learned to be prepared. It was then that he noticed her, Camilla's daughter, walking with a confidence that drew attention. She was older than George by a few years, known in certain circles for her charm, wit, and at times unpredictable behavior. Today, she appeared particularly animated, moving through the crowd with an energy that seemed to ripple outward, pulling eyes toward her. George recognized her immediately, not just by sight, but by reputation. There had been rumors of her adventures, her impromptu decisions, and her tendency to act first and think later. Normally, this would have been something to ignore, yet there was a presence in the way she carried herself that felt different. He could not pinpoint why, but a subtle tension gripped him. His parents noticed her as well, exchanging quick, almost imperceptible glances. They did not speak, but George sensed the unspoken communication, a recognition of potential disruption, a silent calculation of how events might unfold. Royal protocol often required measured responses, patience, and composure, yet there were moments when instinct took over, a warning that something might challenge the carefully maintained order. George's mother placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, a gentle reminder that everything would be fine. He appreciated the gesture, though the unease in his chest remained. As the morning progressed, the palace seemed to hum with activity. Servants moved gracefully through the corridors, setting up tables, arranging flowers, and preparing refreshments. Musicians tuned their instruments for the small concert that would entertain guests later, filling the air with a soft, melodic backdrop. The scent of freshly baked pastries drifted from the kitchens, mingling with the floral aromas outside, creating a comforting yet energizing atmosphere. George took it all in, trying to focus on the beauty and normalcy of the moment, but the feeling of anticipation, like the quiet before a storm, kept tugging at his attention. The crowd continued to swell, their enthusiasm growing with each passing minute. Children waved small flags, parents lifted cameras high to capture every detail, and elderly spectators stood with quiet pride, having witnessed many royal events over the years. George's eyes scanned the faces, noting the mixture of excitement, admiration, and curiosity. He waved politely, smiled when appropriate, and felt the warmth of genuine affection from the crowd. Yet through it all, he could not ignore the subtle disruptions. A murmur here, a hurried movement there, and the sense that not everything would proceed as planned. Camilla's daughter moved closer, weaving through the gathering with an energy that seemed almost magnetic. People turned their heads, some whispering, others pointing discreetly. George felt a pang of concern, not out of dislike, but out of caution. He had learned that appearances could be deceiving, that even a small ripple in the calm could become a wave if not handled carefully. He shifted slightly, adjusting his stance, as the young woman approached with a smile that was both charming and mischievous. There was something unpredictable about her presence, and George knew instinctively that the day's tranquility could soon be interrupted. At that moment, a gust of wind rustled through the trees, carrying the sound of distant laughter and conversation. The palace grounds seemed to hold their breath, as if aware that something was about to change. George's father gave him a brief nod, a silent acknowledgement that he should remain alert. George straightened his back, his gaze steady but thoughtful, trying to remain calm while his mind processed the subtle signs of tension. The air, once crisp and peaceful, now carried a faint undercurrent of uncertainty. The hours that followed were a delicate balance of appearances and awareness. George moved gracefully, interacting with guests, answering polite questions, and occasionally laughing at lighthearted remarks. Yet always in the back of his mind, he monitored the movements around him. Camilla's daughter, energetic and unpredictable, was a presence he could not ignore. The subtle tension grew, weaving itself into the background of his thoughts. It was not fear exactly, but a heightened sense of awareness, a readiness for anything that might unfold. By late morning, the palace grounds had transformed into a vibrant tableau of activity. The sun climbed higher, casting a warm glow over the meticulously maintained gardens. Photographers captured every moment, children's laughter echoed, and the subtle beauty of the day unfolded around George. He walked carefully, maintaining composure while his mind quietly assessed the situation. He knew that public life required balance, the ability to engage, to appear calm, and to navigate unpredictability with grace. Yet beneath the surface, a quiet anticipation persisted, a sense that the calm could be broken at any moment. As the first hints of noon approached, George paused for a moment, taking in the scene with a thoughtful expression. He admired the dedication of the staff, the enthusiasm of the crowd, and the beauty of the palace itself. But his attention kept returning to the young woman moving through the crowd, her presence a reminder that even in the most controlled settings, unpredictability was always near. George's heart rate remained steady, his expression calm, yet internally he felt a tension that refused to dissipate. He had learned to manage such feelings, to remain poised, but today there was an extra edge, a reminder that life, even in its most beautiful moments, could change in an instant. And so, the day continued, seemingly calm on the surface but charged with subtle energy beneath. Prince George walked among the crowd, greeted smiles and nods, and maintained the composure expected of him. Yet, as he moved through the palace gardens, he remained quietly vigilant, aware that the tranquility of the morning might not last. Something was stirring, a prelude to events that would test not only his composure, but also the very sense of security he had long taken for granted. The stage was set, the players were in motion, and the calm before the storm lingered, palpable and unyielding in the air around him. The palace grounds, which had seemed so peaceful and bright earlier in the morning, now carried a subtle undercurrent of tension. Prince George walked beside his parents, keeping a composed expression, though his mind remained alert. He could not shake the feeling that something unusual was about to happen. His instincts, honed from years of public appearances and the careful observation of his surroundings, told him that the day's calm might soon be disturbed. From a distance, he noticed her again, Camilla's daughter. She moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for something or someone. Her presence, once a minor curiosity, now drew attention in a way that made George uneasy. She was not simply mingling with the crowd or admiring the palace. There was an energy about her that seemed almost magnetic, pulling people's eyes and thoughts toward her. Even among the excitement of the gathering, she stood out. George's parents exchanged quick glances, subtle but loaded with meaning. Their silent communication spoke volumes. They recognized her unpredictability and were wary of what she might do. It was not the first time she had acted impulsively in public, but today the stakes felt higher. George felt the weight of their unspoken concern. He had learned that these moments often required patience, caution, and the ability to remain calm no matter what unfolded. The crowd began to sense the shift, too. Whispers spread like ripples across water, curiosity mixed with unease. Some spectators noticed her weaving through the gathering with an unusual determination. Others, absorbed in the excitement of seeing the royal family, did not yet realize the potential disruption. Cameras clicked and flashes flickered as photographers tried to capture every moment, unaware that the story about to unfold would be far more dramatic than any photograph could convey. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, a small commotion began near the main entrance. A few bystanders stepped back, their eyes widening, murmuring to each other. George's attention sharpened immediately. His instincts told him something was happening, something beyond the ordinary flow of a royal event. He moved slightly closer to his parents, maintaining his composure while his mind raced through possible scenarios. Camilla's daughter had approached the restricted area near the palace gates. Normally, security was tight and access was strictly controlled. Yet she walked confidently toward the barrier, seemingly unconcerned about the rules. George felt a sudden knot of tension in his stomach. He knew that anyone breaching this area could cause serious concern, and the potential for chaos was high. His parents remained composed outwardly, but George could sense their quiet alertness, their hands poised to intervene if necessary. The palace guards reacted swiftly. Their training was rigorous, and every guard knew how to handle unexpected situations. They moved toward her with precision, their footsteps deliberate, their eyes locked on her movements. George could see the disciplined coordination of their approach, yet the energy of the crowd made the scene feel almost chaotic. Shouts of warning and attempts to redirect her added to the tension, creating a swirling mix of motion and anticipation. Despite the guards' efforts, Camilla's daughter did not retreat. Instead, she stepped closer to the barrier, her movements quick and deliberate. There was a spark of defiance in her eyes, a determination to challenge the restrictions set before her. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, curiosity turning into anxiety. George's heart raced slightly, though he maintained his outward calm. He understood that in moments like these, panic could spread faster than reason. The crowd needed to see confidence and control, not fear. Suddenly, one of the royal guards, reacting to what he perceived as a possible threat, drew his weapon. It was not aimed at the crowd or at Camilla's daughter directly, but a warning shot into the air. The sound of the gunshot shattered the calm, echoing across the palace grounds with startling force. The sharp report of the firearm made birds scatter from the trees, and even George flinched at the unexpected noise. The crowd panicked instantly. Screams and gasps filled the air as people scrambled to find safety. Children clung to their parents, photographers dropped their cameras, and the orderly excitement of the morning dissolved into chaos. The palace staff moved quickly to usher the royal family to a safe location, forming protective barriers around George and his parents. Every movement was precise, practiced, and urgent, a dance of professionalism against the backdrop of sudden disorder. Amid the commotion, George's mind raced. He was shocked not just by the gunshot, but by the realization that someone so close, someone connected to his family, had caused this upheaval. Camilla's daughter stood there, momentarily frozen, her eyes wide with a mix of defiance and surprise. The guards moved toward her, carefully ensuring that she was not harmed while still controlling the situation. She was detained, her movements restricted but unharmed. The drama of the moment left George momentarily stunned. The crowd's reactions were intense. Spectators who had been thrilled to see the royal family now murmured in confusion and fear. Questions spread like wildfire. Why had a gun been fired? Was the royal family in danger? Who was responsible for this disruption? Social media began to light up even before the event ended, with videos capturing fragments of the incident. George, standing safely behind his parents, felt the strange mix of exposure and protection that came with life in the public eye. As the guards led Camilla's daughter away, George struggled to process what had just happened. His emotions were a tangle of shock, confusion, and a deep sense of disappointment. He had witnessed the abrupt collapse of what had started as a beautiful and orderly morning. His thoughts went to questions he could not yet answer. Why had she done this? Did she understand the risks? How would the palace respond? He knew he would have to remain composed in front of the crowd and cameras, but internally he felt shaken. His parents remained calm beside him, projecting an outward serenity that belied the seriousness of the moment. George admired their composure, understanding that it was part of his education as a young prince. In public life, one's reactions were observed and scrutinized, and showing panic or anger could escalate an already tense situation. He drew a deep breath, attempting to steady himself, feeling the reassuring presence of his parents at his side. The palace staff quickly restored order, moving the crowd away from the restricted areas and ensuring that everyone was safe. Photographers were guided to designated zones, and security officers doubled their vigilance. George, though still processing the events, took note of the professionalism around him. Every guard, every aide, every member of the staff was performing their duties with precision, turning potential disaster into controlled management. Yet despite the efficiency and control, the emotional impact lingered. George could not forget the startling gunshot, the way the crowd had reacted, or the presence of someone so close to his family creating such disruption. It was a reminder that even in the most secure and well-planned environments, unpredictability could strike. He felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that no one was hurt, sadness that family connections could sometimes bring unexpected challenges. The media, already present in large numbers, began documenting the aftermath. Cameras captured the cautious movements of guards, the concerned expressions of onlookers, and the young prince's composed demeanor. Reporters whispered among themselves, piecing together fragments of information into emerging narratives. George felt the weight of scrutiny settle on his shoulders. Every glance, every expression, every measured word could be analyzed and interpreted by the public and the press. It was a responsibility he had carried since birth, but moments like these intensified the pressure. Amid the noise and movement, George's mind returned to Camilla's daughter. He wondered what had motivated her, what she had hoped to achieve, and whether she realized the seriousness of her actions. The thought was troubling. Family ties were meant to be a source of support and guidance, yet here was a stark reminder that impulsive choices could have wide-reaching consequences. George resolved to remain thoughtful and measured, even as he felt a personal disappointment that would linger long after the day ended. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was only minutes, a semblance of calm returned. The guards resumed their positions, the crowd settled into quieter observation, and the royal family continued with a carefully adjusted schedule. George, though still shaken, moved with deliberate care, acknowledging well-wishers and photographers with polite nods and gentle smiles. He maintained an outward composure that contrasted sharply with the storm of thoughts inside him, a balance of duty and human emotion that he had learned to navigate. Despite the return to routine, George understood that the morning's events would not be easily forgotten. The image of the warning shot, the chaotic crowd, and the defiance of someone so close to his family would remain etched in his memory. He had faced many public moments before, but this was different. It was a stark lesson in unpredictability, responsibility, and the delicate balance of public life. And while the palace grounds returned to a sense of order, George knew that the emotional echoes of the incident would ripple through his thoughts for days, perhaps weeks, to come. The palace grounds had slowly returned to an uneasy calm after the sudden chaos. The crowd that had earlier been filled with excitement now seemed nervous, their earlier enthusiasm replaced with curiosity and concern. Prince George, though physically safe behind the protective presence of his parents and the royal guards, could still feel the lingering tension in the air. The morning had begun with sunshine, birdsong, and a quiet serenity, but now those sounds felt distant, almost like echoes from another world. The events that had just unfolded left an indelible mark, not only on the palace grounds but also on the young prince's thoughts. George's mind raced as he tried to process everything he had witnessed. He had always known that life as a royal came with unusual challenges, but experiencing a situation so sudden, so unpredictable, was different. He replayed the moments in his head, the sharp crack of the warning shot, the way the crowd had screamed and scattered, and the expression of defiance on Camilla's daughter's face. It was hard to reconcile the controlled life he knew with the unpredictable reality of the world beyond the palace walls. The immediate aftermath was a delicate balancing act. Guards continued to keep the crowd at a safe distance, directing them to move away from restricted areas and ensuring that everyone remained calm. Staff members whispered instructions to each other, their movements precise and efficient. Cameras still clicked as photographers captured images of George and his parents, but there was a noticeable shift in the mood. The cheerful energy that had dominated the morning was replaced with concern and cautious attention. Even strangers in the crowd seemed aware that something significant had occurred. George's parents guided him toward a more secure area, away from the main crowd. Their movements were smooth and practiced, a reflection of years of experience in handling unexpected incidents. As he walked, George could hear the low murmur of conversations from the crowd, questions and speculations floating through the air. People whispered about what had happened, trying to piece together fragments of the event they had witnessed. Who was responsible? Why had the warning shot been fired? Was the royal family in danger? These questions buzzed in the air, some reaching George's ears despite the security measures. Inside the palace's private courtyard, George was finally able to pause and take a deep breath. He leaned slightly against a decorative stone railing, letting himself feel the tension he had been holding back. His heart was still beating a little faster than normal, and the image of the warning shot lingered in his mind. Though no one had been harmed, the incident had reminded him of how fragile a moment of peace could be, even in a place as secure as the palace. He realized that safety was not something to be taken for granted, no matter how many precautions were in place. His parents stood nearby, exchanging quiet words with the palace staff. George observed their composure, marveling at the calm authority they displayed. They remained outwardly serene, their faces showing no trace of fear, but George sensed the careful calculation behind every gesture. They were assessing the situation, deciding how to respond publicly, and planning how to prevent similar incidents in the future. For George, it was a lesson in leadership and responsibility, how to remain composed even when events threatened to spiral out of control. As George looked around, he noticed the subtle reactions of those around him. The palace staff moved efficiently but cautiously, their eyes occasionally flicking toward the entrances and the crowd beyond. Guards maintained a steady presence, their alertness heightened after the incident. Even the visitors who had not directly witnessed the warning shot seemed to sense that something unusual had occurred. George realized that while people might not fully understand the situation, they could feel the shift in energy, the quiet tension that lingered like a shadow over the palace grounds. Camilla's daughter had been taken to a secure area by the guards, and George knew she was unharmed, though her actions had caused significant concern. He wondered what had motivated her to act so impulsively. Was it a moment of curiosity, a desire for attention, or simply a lack of understanding of the potential consequences? He did not know, and part of him felt frustrated at the uncertainty. He had always believed in responsibility, in thinking before acting, and yet here was someone connected to his family who had disrupted the peace with a single, impulsive decision. Despite the tension, life inside the palace continued. Courtiers and staff resumed their duties, preparing for the scheduled events of the day, though with heightened caution. Musicians quietly tuned their instruments in a corner, the soft sound of strings filling the air with a sense of normalcy. Tables were arranged carefully, refreshments set out, and flowers adjusted to perfection. The palace seemed to move forward, almost as if determined not to let a single incident overshadow its dignity. George took comfort in this, recognizing that even in moments of disruption, life continued and order could be restored. Yet the emotional impact on George was significant. He felt a mix of disappointment, worry, and lingering fear. Disappointment that someone close to his family had acted recklessly, worry about the potential consequences for security and public perception, and a subtle fear that events could have turned out differently. He understood intellectually that the guards had acted correctly and that everyone was safe, but the memory of the warning shot and the sudden chaos was difficult to shake. It was a reminder of how quickly circumstances could change and how fragile the perception of safety could be. George's thoughts drifted to the crowd outside. He wondered what they thought, what they had felt in those tense moments. Some had likely been frightened, others confused, and perhaps a few had been impressed by the rapid response of the guards. He understood that public perception mattered greatly, especially in times of crisis. How the royal family responded, how composed they appeared, and how incidents were managed would shape the narrative long after the moment had passed. He knew that appearances were not superficial. They were part of the responsibility he carried as a young prince. As he stood there, reflecting, George noticed the subtle changes in his own feelings. The shock of the moment was beginning to give way to a more analytical perspective. He began to consider what lessons could be learned from the incident. Preparedness, he realized, was not only about physical security but also about mental readiness. The ability to remain calm under pressure, to assess situations quickly, and to act with thoughtfulness were skills he would need throughout his life. He resolved to pay closer attention, not just to the external world, but also to the unpredictable nature of human behavior, even among those he trusted. The palace staff soon approached with updates. Camilla's daughter was safe and being supervised, and the situation was under control. George listened attentively, absorbing the information while maintaining a composed exterior. Inside, however, he felt a swirl of emotions: relief that no one had been hurt, frustration at the disruption, and a lingering curiosity about what had driven her actions. He realized that dealing with people's unpredictability, even those within one's own family, would be a constant challenge in life and in public duty. The young prince's parents joined him again, placing reassuring hands on his shoulders. Their gestures conveyed a quiet strength, a reminder that he was not alone in facing difficult situations. George appreciated their presence, drawing comfort from their calm demeanor. He understood that part of his education, as a royal, was learning to manage emotions while maintaining composure. This was not just about appearances. It was about understanding the responsibilities that came with his position and the importance of careful, thoughtful action in the face of unexpected challenges. Despite the lingering tension, George began to regain a sense of control over his thoughts and emotions. He practiced slow, steady breathing, focusing on the present moment rather than the chaotic events that had just occurred. He observed the palace gardens, noting the intricate patterns of the flowers, the sunlight reflecting off the fountains, and the birds cautiously returning to the trees. These simple details, once almost taken for granted, now felt grounding, reminding him that order and beauty could exist even after moments of disruption. As the afternoon approached, George considered the larger implications of the incident. He knew that this event would likely be discussed by the media, analyzed by commentators, and remembered by those who witnessed it. He also knew that his own response, his ability to maintain calm and composure, would become part of the story. It was a sobering thought, but one he accepted. Life as a royal was never free from scrutiny, and moments of chaos could serve as lessons in resilience, patience, and leadership. Finally, after some time, the palace grounds began to feel more settled. The crowd was managed effectively, the staff and guards resumed their roles, and the immediate tension slowly dissipated. George remained thoughtful, reflecting on the lessons of the morning. He understood that life could be unpredictable, that people could act impulsively, and that maintaining composure in challenging situations was both a duty and a skill. Though the events had shaken him emotionally, he also recognized the opportunity to grow, to learn, and to become more aware of the complexities of public life. As the sun continued its climb in the sky, George allowed himself a quiet moment of reflection. The events of the morning would not be forgotten, but they no longer dominated his thoughts. He had processed the shock, acknowledged his emotions, and begun to focus on the importance of careful observation, readiness, and calm decision-making. Life, he realized, would continue despite unexpected disruptions, and it was his responsibility to navigate those disruptions with grace and composure. The days following the incident were tense and full of activity inside the palace. What had started as a bright, calm morning had transformed into a moment of public scrutiny and private reflection. Prince George found himself navigating a world that felt both familiar and uncertain. Although he remained physically safe, the emotional impact of the chaos lingered. Every glance from a staff member, every whispered conversation, seemed to carry subtle weight, as if the memory of the disruption had left an invisible mark on the palace itself. George's parents maintained their composed demeanor, but George could sense the careful planning behind their actions. Meetings with senior palace staff were held to discuss the incident in detail, reviewing security protocols, crowd management strategies, and potential risks. George observed these discussions with a mixture of curiosity and concern. He understood that his parents were not only addressing immediate security issues, but also considering how the event would be perceived by the public and the media. Every decision mattered, and George began to appreciate the full responsibility that came with being part of a royal family. Camilla's daughter, the cause of the disruption, was kept under careful supervision. Although she had acted impulsively, no one had been harmed, and the palace emphasized discretion in handling the situation. George, however, could not ignore the emotional effect her actions had on him. He had been shocked and unsettled, and now he found himself reflecting on questions about trust, accountability, and family responsibility. Why had she acted in such a way? Did she understand the seriousness of her actions? And perhaps most importantly, how would this affect the relationships within the family? The media had quickly picked up on the story. Headlines hinted at chaos, security breaches, and dramatic encounters, though many details were incomplete or speculative. George felt the pressure of public attention more keenly now. Every photo taken, every statement made by the palace, and every reaction from those involved could shape the narrative. While the staff worked diligently to manage the situation, George realized that the story of that morning would continue to follow him, influencing perceptions of both his composure and the behavior of those around him. Inside the palace, life resumed, but with a heightened sense of awareness. Security measures were reinforced. Guards patrolled with increased vigilance, checking every corner and monitoring entrances with stricter protocols. Staff members moved carefully, aware that the palace's routine had been disrupted, and that a reminder of unpredictability could appear at any moment. George found himself noticing details he had never considered before: the placement of gates, the flow of the crowd, even the subtle movements of those around him. The morning's chaos had sharpened his perception, teaching him that even the smallest lapse could have significant consequences. Despite the precautions, George struggled with his own emotions. He felt a mix of frustration, sadness, and lingering shock. He was frustrated by the reckless actions that had caused the chaos, saddened that someone close to his family could act so impulsively, and unsettled by the memory of the gunshot and the panic in the crowd. At the same time, he felt a quiet determination to understand the event and its consequences, to learn from it, and to emerge stronger and more aware. He realized that emotional resilience was as important as physical safety, especially in the unpredictable world of public life. His parents offered support and guidance, reminding him of the importance of composure and thoughtful action. They spoke with him privately, emphasizing that while emotions were natural, his public behavior needed to reflect calm and maturity. George listened intently, absorbing their advice and reflecting on his own reactions. He understood that this was part of growing into his role, not simply as a member of a royal family, but as someone who would represent his family to the world. The morning's events had provided a lesson in both patience and responsibility, one that he would carry forward into future challenges. Camilla, meanwhile, faced scrutiny of a different kind. As the mother of the young woman whose actions had caused the disruption, she found herself questioned by the palace staff and gently admonished for her daughter's impulsive behavior. Though she remained calm outwardly, George could sense her internal concern. The incident had highlighted not only the importance of public safety, but also the ways in which family behavior could influence perception. Camilla's role now involved supporting her daughter while helping the palace navigate the delicate aftermath, a balance that required tact, patience, and careful judgment. George's attention often returned to the idea of public perception. He realized that the incident, though brief, would be remembered by those who witnessed it and reported on it. The way the royal family responded, the visible composure of himself and his parents, and the measured handling of Camilla's daughter's actions would all shape the narrative. He understood that leadership involved not just private decisions, but also visible actions that reassured the public and reinforced trust. Every gesture, every expression, every carefully chosen word contributed to the story that would be told about that day. Amid the scrutiny and activity, George found moments of quiet reflection. He would walk through the palace gardens alone, observing the fountains, the flowers, and the sunlight filtering through the trees. These moments provided him with a chance to process his emotions and regain a sense of balance. He thought about the unpredictability of life, the importance of preparedness, and the value of maintaining calm under pressure. The morning's events had shaken him, but they had also offered lessons that could not be learned in ordinary circumstances. The palace staff worked diligently to maintain a sense of normalcy. Preparations for scheduled events continued, though with subtle adjustments to accommodate heightened security and awareness. Musicians rehearsed quietly, staff organized rooms with meticulous care, and guards patrolled with a sense of quiet vigilance. George observed all of this with a growing appreciation for the intricate network of people who ensured the smooth operation of the palace. Their dedication and professionalism were a source of reassurance, reminding him that even in moments of disruption, order could be restored. As the days passed, George noticed a change in himself. He felt more aware of the environment around him, more attuned to the emotions of those nearby, and more conscious of the potential consequences of impulsive actions. The incident with Camilla's daughter had been a stark reminder that unpredictability could arise anywhere, even in familiar settings. George resolved to use this experience as an opportunity for personal growth, to strengthen his composure, refine his judgment, and deepen his understanding of responsibility. At the same time, George remained compassionate in his reflections. He did not harbor anger toward Camilla's daughter, recognizing that her actions were impulsive rather than malicious. Instead, he focused on understanding the motivations behind the disruption and considering how future incidents could be prevented. He realized that empathy, combined with vigilance, was a crucial part of navigating both family dynamics and public life. The royal family also engaged in private conversations about boundaries, responsibility, and trust. George participated in these discussions, learning how to communicate effectively, how to set expectations, and how to respond thoughtfully to challenges. These lessons were not abstract, they were deeply personal and immediately relevant. He began to see that public life, with all its rules and scrutiny, was intertwined with personal relationships in ways that demanded care and reflection. Meanwhile, Camilla's daughter, guided by her mother and palace advisors, reflected on her own actions. She began to understand the seriousness of her behavior and the potential consequences of acting impulsively in public. George observed her efforts from a distance, noting the subtle changes in her demeanor. While he remained cautious, he also recognized the potential for growth and reconciliation. Families, after all, were complex, and mistakes could provide opportunities for learning and improvement. Throughout all of this, George maintained his public duties. He attended scheduled appearances, greeted guests, and continued to interact with the public, always mindful of the lessons learned from the disruption. His composure, even after the dramatic events, impressed staff and onlookers alike. George understood that resilience was not just an internal quality, it was also a visible one, demonstrated through calm behavior, careful thought, and measured actions. By the end of the week, the palace had regained a sense of stability. Security protocols had been reviewed and strengthened, staff operated with renewed diligence, and George had processed much of the emotional impact of the incident. Though the memory of the chaos lingered, it no longer dominated his thoughts. Instead, it became a reference point, a reminder of the unpredictability of life, the importance of composure, and the value of learning from unexpected experiences. George's reflections extended beyond the immediate aftermath. He began to think about how the incident might influence future decisions, both for himself and for others in the family. He considered the ways in which leadership, responsibility, and empathy intersected, and how he could use this experience to grow into his role as a member of the royal family. The lessons were subtle but profound. Preparation, awareness, and emotional intelligence were as essential as courage, composure, and resilience. Ultimately, the events of that week left George with a deeper understanding of both public life and personal responsibility. He recognized that challenges could arise unexpectedly, that family dynamics could influence public perception, and that careful reflection and thoughtful action were key to maintaining trust and composure. While the incident with Camilla's daughter had been unsettling, it also offered an opportunity for growth, insight, and the strengthening of character. As George walked through the palace gardens one afternoon, the sun casting a golden glow over the fountains and flowers, he felt a sense of quiet determination. Life, he realized, would always include moments of unpredictability, moments that tested patience, composure, and judgment. But with careful observation, thoughtful reflection, and an understanding of responsibility, he could navigate these challenges with grace. The palace, the crowd, and even the impulsive actions of family members were all part of a world that demanded balance, awareness, and resilience. And Prince George, despite his youth, was learning how to meet these demands with courage and wisdom. After the week of tension, careful planning, and reflection, Prince George slowly began to feel a sense of normalcy return to his life. The palace grounds, which had once been filled with the echo of the warning shot and the chaos of the crowd, now carried a calmer, steadier energy. The birds returned to their usual songs in the trees, the fountains sparkled under the sun as if nothing had happened, and visitors strolled through the gardens with curiosity and admiration. Yet, for George, the events of that morning remained vivid in his memory. They had shaken him, but they had also taught him lessons that he would carry forward. He found himself thinking often about responsibility and trust. The impulsive actions of Camilla's daughter had been a stark reminder of how unpredictable life could be, even within the family. George reflected on his own behavior during the chaos, recognizing moments where he had maintained composure and moments where his mind had raced with worry. He understood that life in the public eye required not only calm in the face of danger, but also resilience after the storm had passed. The ability to reflect and learn was as important as the ability to act swiftly when needed. George spent more time with his parents during these days, observing how they handled the aftermath. They moved with a quiet authority, speaking carefully to staff and advisors, yet always maintaining warmth and reassurance when interacting with him. Their guidance was subtle but powerful, reminding him that leadership was not only about making decisions, but also about setting an example. George absorbed these lessons with care, understanding that his own behavior and choices were increasingly shaping not only his public image, but also the perception of the family as a whole. Camilla's daughter, meanwhile, had begun to show signs of reflection herself. Guided by her mother and the palace staff, she spent time considering the consequences of her actions. George observed her progress cautiously, noting her more thoughtful demeanor and willingness to understand the impact she had caused. While he remained wary, he also recognized that people could grow and change, and that forgiveness and understanding were important parts of family life. It was a reminder that mistakes, even serious ones, could be opportunities for learning and reconciliation. The palace, too, had adjusted to ensure that such an incident would be less likely to happen again. Security protocols were reviewed and strengthened, entrances and restricted areas were monitored with greater vigilance, and staff received additional guidance on crowd management and rapid response. For George, these changes were both reassuring and enlightening. He realized that preparation and foresight were essential, not only for personal safety, but also for the trust and confidence of those who looked to the royal family for stability and leadership. Despite these practical measures, George remained aware of the emotional impact the event had on him. The memory of the warning shot, the panic of the crowd, and the defiance of someone he knew had left a lasting impression. He understood that moments of fear and uncertainty could never be fully erased from memory, but he also recognized the importance of using those experiences as tools for growth. He began to feel a quiet determination to approach future challenges with composure, empathy, and thoughtful action. As the days turned into weeks, George resumed more public appearances. Each event was approached with careful attention, not just to protocol, but also to the lessons he had learned. He moved through crowds with grace, acknowledging well-wishers with a calm smile and speaking politely with guests and staff. Every interaction became a chance to demonstrate resilience, thoughtfulness, and maturity. He knew that the public observed him closely, and he wanted to ensure that his behavior reflected both his personal values and the dignity of his family. In private moments, George reflected on his feelings about family, responsibility, and trust. He thought about how easily situations could become unpredictable, even among people he cared about deeply. He realized that relationships required understanding, patience, and communication, especially in high-pressure environments. The incident had revealed vulnerabilities, but it had also highlighted strengths, the ability to remain calm, to act responsibly, and to learn from experience. George carried these insights with him, recognizing that they were part of the ongoing process of growth and maturity. Camilla's daughter, now more aware of the consequences of her actions, had begun to apologize in small, thoughtful ways. George noticed these gestures, subtle as they were, and felt a sense of cautious reconciliation. He understood that forgiveness was not immediate, nor did it erase the past, but it opened the possibility for stronger, more thoughtful relationships in the future. He began to see her not just as a source of disruption, but as someone capable of learning and change, a perspective that brought a sense of relief and hope. The media continued to cover the story, though much of the initial sensationalism had faded. The palace released measured statements emphasizing safety, professionalism, and calm resolution. George watched the coverage carefully, learning how words and images could influence public perception. He understood that his own demeanor, combined with the actions of the palace staff, helped reassure the public and maintain trust. It was a lesson in the power of composure and careful communication, one that would serve him well throughout his life. Throughout all of this, George found comfort in the routines of palace life. Walks in the gardens, quiet moments by the fountains, and interactions with staff and family became opportunities for reflection and grounding. He took time to observe details that had previously gone unnoticed. The way sunlight glinted off leaves, the delicate patterns of flowers, and the steady flow of water in the fountains. These small, peaceful moments reminded him that even after chaos, life continued, and beauty could still be found in everyday experiences. As the months passed, George's confidence and composure continued to grow. He approached challenges with a thoughtful mindset, weighing potential outcomes and considering the feelings of others. The incident with Camilla's daughter had left an imprint, but it had also strengthened his awareness, resilience, and ability to navigate both public and private responsibilities. He began to see himself not just as a young prince, but as someone learning to embody the qualities of leadership, empathy, and measured action. George also reflected on the lessons of forgiveness and understanding. He realized that family dynamics were complex, and that mistakes could teach valuable lessons. Camilla's daughter's actions had been impulsive, but they had sparked a period of reflection, growth, and reconciliation for everyone involved. George understood that relationships were strengthened not by avoiding mistakes, but by facing them thoughtfully, learning from them, and supporting one another through the consequences. The palace itself resumed a sense of normalcy. Visitors returned, events proceeded with care, and the daily rhythm of life unfolded as it had before. George moved through these experiences with a new sense of awareness and confidence. He recognized that while the past could not be changed, the future was shaped by how he chose to respond, learn, and grow. Each decision, each interaction, and each reflection became part of his journey toward maturity and leadership. As the sun set over the palace gardens one evening, George took a quiet walk alone. The sky was painted with hues of gold and pink, the fountains reflected the fading light, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of flowers. In that moment, he felt a sense of calm, a balance between reflection and hope. He thought about the lessons of the past weeks, the unpredictability of life, the importance of composure, the value of empathy, and the strength found in careful reflection. He realized that these lessons were not only relevant to public life, but also to personal growth and family relationships. George understood that life would continue to present challenges, some expected and some entirely unforeseen. But he felt a quiet confidence in his ability to face them with thoughtfulness, composure, and resilience. The morning of chaos, the warning shot, and the disruption caused by Camilla's daughter had been frightening and unsettling. Yet they had also provided an opportunity to learn, grow, and strengthen both character and perspective. As he returned to the palace, George felt a sense of quiet determination. He would continue to carry himself with dignity, respond to challenges thoughtfully, and maintain composure in both public and private life. He knew that mistakes, both his own and those of others, were part of life, but he also knew that reflection, empathy, and careful action could transform even difficult experiences into opportunities for growth. The incident, once a source of fear and chaos, had become a turning point. George had faced unpredictability, observed the consequences of impulsive behavior, and experienced the importance of responsibility and preparation. He had seen the ways in which relationships could be tested, the value of forgiveness, and the necessity of maintaining calm under pressure. Most importantly, he had discovered a deeper understanding of himself, his family, and the responsibilities he carried as a young prince. By the time evening fell, George had reached a sense of peace. The palace was quiet, the gardens glowed in the soft twilight, and the lessons of the past weeks had settled into his mind like the gentle closing of a chapter. He understood that life would always hold surprises, some exciting, some challenging, but that he possessed the strength, awareness, and empathy to navigate them. The warning shot that had once shattered the calm was now a memory, a reminder not of fear, but of growth, resilience, and the enduring value of composure and thoughtful reflection. Prince George, though still young, had emerged stronger from the events that had once threatened to overwhelm him. He carried forward the lessons of responsibility, trust, empathy, and leadership, knowing that life would continue to present both challenges and opportunities. And as he looked out across the palace gardens one last time that evening, he felt a quiet confidence that, no matter what came next, he would face it with grace, courage, and wisdom.